All right. So Gabby, you'll probably be able to see that channel link if you go to the YouTube page because
Okay.
we are live now. So
Awesome.
welcome to everyone who is live with us here on the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project's YouTube channel, or if you are watching later in the evening, welcome to you as well. We are so happy for you to be here with us today. I am very fortunate to be joined by three absolutely incredible artists this evening, Gabrielle Dinger, Rebecca A. Fliss, and Romina Gonzalez. They are all artists who are featured in the Collective Memory exhibition organized through the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project. The purpose of that exhibition is to raise awareness about memory and memory loss, as in with as in sticking with our mission with the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project. So part of our mission is to elevate art, community, and connection. And we're doing that through this ongoing panel series as well. So this is part one in a three-part panel series. And I wanted to share with everyone some of the latest facts and figures from the Alzheimer's Association that just recently came out. As of 2021, there are now more than 6 million Americans living with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And something that's very stark, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Alzheimer's and dementia deaths have increased by 16%. So I do like to bring awareness to Alzheimer's and dementia in whatever we're doing. So that is how we are doing that tonight. And we're also connecting to material memory. So the three artists who are with me tonight have an incredible studio practice and have a lot of different materials that they manipulate and concepts they're working with. So we're going to learn a little bit more about these three artists. So first, we're going to learn about Romina Gonzalez and her studio practice, and I am just going to get ready to share my screen. And I will spotlight Romina. Thank you for being here with us this evening.
Thank you for having me and having us and organizing this. It's wonderful. Um, as Rosemary mentioned, my name is Romina. I am currently based in New York City and Newburgh, but I'm originally from Lima, Peru. And I started working with glass about 10 years ago when I moved to the States. And I was classically trained in sculpture, but I wanted to work with glass because of how responsive the material is. I realized that in its molten state, it reacts very, very promptly and in a very specific way to any external stimulus, being the environment or being the person manipulating it. So throughout that process, I started working with learning the craft to then be able to start coming up with ways that I wanted to work specifically with that were in line with my conceptual inquiries. So the work that I have featured here in the Collective Memory exhibition are these spools. The series is titled Finding the Window, and they are singular masses of molten glass that have been stretched all at one moment, based only exclusively from the heat provided by the furnace when the glass was collected. And that started as a desire to see the boundaries of the material, but also in a way to exist in a place of balance between control and letting go, and also experimenting with the memory of the material and seeing how far can it go, what can it do, and what are its possibilities. So if we could go to the next slide. This is another piece I made from that same series. This is a pull and a sag. And again, because we're talking about it in the context of material memory, it's just so incredible how glass behaves itself in almost unpredictable ways that are particular to that material itself. This one, after making the straight pulls, I intended to make a straight pull and get it to sag very even, almost like a ribbon or a piece of fabric. But I didn't, of course, account for the fact that there was more density, more material density in the center of the piece, and that sagged separately from the sides because the more material holds more heat. So in glass specifically, I'm working with the temperature of the material. And that's also where memory comes in, because you can establish the memory in the material. Wherever you choose to touch it with a cold tool or blow air into it, or just let it cool down while you heat another part, whatever part is hotter will move faster or move at a different rate than the cooler down part. So let's move to the next slide. This is another angle of that piece. These were installed at my studio that I had in Brooklyn. I recently moved completely upstate, so I'm in Newburgh now. But let's just keep going to the next one. And these are, I installed that piece again. Here I was part of a group exhibition titled Terraderma here in Newburgh. And the two other artists that were showing, Mariken Kokius and Ken Peterson, both worked in painting and collage. They invited me to show these pieces because, again, we were talking about the structure of the earth, soil, and how natural materials react to human intervenence. So I had the opportunity to reinstall the pieces in a way that I envisioned them more existing in the world. And this is a stone that I collected from a park in Crown Heights, where I used to live in Brooklyn. And I think adding the weight of a natural element also enhanced that what I'm speaking about, the tension within the material, and finding that sweet spot where it can be manipulated and also kind of like freezing or documenting that moment in time. So let's move to the next slide. This is an image of the process. Here I am with our dear friend, Emily Craddock. I had the opportunity to do a residency in South Jersey at an arts organization called Wheaton Arts, and Emily came down to help me. While I was there for 3 months, she came for a week, and I was able to make this work that I had been thinking of for years. So the process shows, again, how the glass starts as a mass, and then we together and very mindfully and slowly start stretching it. Let's go to the next slide. So then I finally hang it because it gets too long to be able to handle. So I fix it in a specific position and then continue to pull. But actually the pull is done only by the weight of the material. I'm really not, and the heat. I'm really not exerting, or we are not exerting much pressure. We're just working with that window. And it actually took about 10 pieces to be able to learn how to make one and understand, again, how the material behaves, how it moves, what are its boundaries, and when does it want to stop, and also what is the time frame to put it inside the annealer, because glass has to cool down slowly overnight or over a certain amount of time, and if it cools down too quickly at room temperature, it shatters. So yeah, we had to find that balance too between putting it away. And that big box at the back, the black one that's horizontal, that's where the piece went in to cool down slowly over a period of 2 days. So let's go to the next slide. And again, just I wanted to show some other, with Rosemarie, show some other work I've made in the past that evokes the concept of memory. And putting these images together, I didn't realize how much I was touching, or I was thinking about that concept subconsciously, because I really see glass as a material to document, to record, or to store. To store, in this case, I am mopping the floor with hot glass. And it was a performance piece I've done a couple times at different studios. And initially it started as a gesture where I was thinking of the preciousness of the material, of how glass is this beautiful, transparent, fragile, precious element, but it's actually made out of sand and dirt. So I wanted to contrast those things, and also the value it has now in and the cost of working with it, trying to kind of like ground it a little bit more by incorporating more of these natural elements. So if we go to the next slide, after mopping the glass, the floor with glass, I transformed the glass into color bars, which is what you would purchase if you wanted to apply color to a piece you were making or blowing. And these are archived based on the location of when I mopped the floor and the date. So really they are documentation of what happened in that location. And it's kind of like stored in the material forever or until it disintegrates. Let's go to the next slide. So then I utilize the color bar to overlay a clear glass and create a dining set. So I'm kind of repurposing this dirty material and all the connotations that implies into something that's, again, pristine and that we can use. It's able to be used safely for eating, because the dirt is encased by 2 layers of clear glass, and it almost gets highlighted and becomes, it's actually a very nice effect to look at. These pieces were made from dust that I collected from an apartment I lived throughout a residency for 3 months. So again, they archive that specific moment in time. Let's go to the next slide. And speaking about the memory of the material too, I started making these about in 2017, I think I started making these pieces, and I call them the molecular tension series. And I basically blow a form and then super cool an area while the other area of the piece is hot until the material breaks itself. It's the contrast, or the polarity between the molecules, that the ones that are being super cooled are moving at a different rate than the ones that are still malleable and warm. And that's actually what prevents the cracks from running, because if it was just a cup that's at room temperature, the cracks would fully run. So with this work, I was exploring the effect of an external stimulus on the material, and how the material records that, and how it also, in a way, it's fragility and resilience. And I think that all these things can have lots of parallels to our human existence. So we can also think of how external stimulus affect ourselves, anywhere from anything like a pleasant experience, like walking in nature, to trauma. So it depends on how we choose to look at that. So if we go to the next slide, it's kind of one of the first pieces I successfully made, and I'm still working on installing them or seeing how they exist in the world. I'm working on creating an installation or a series titled Contemporary Tribe, and thinking of these spheres as foreparents, or kind of like ancestors in a way. And then if you move down to the next slide, we'll see a little close-up of that. This piece is, I think, about 16 to 20 inches, the glass component. And again, like the way that it breaks is completely irreplicable, and I am not using force at all. I am not using impact. I am just using air, or cold air, to blow on one consistent part of the glass repeatedly until it naturally shatters. Let's go to the next slide. And this is, again, these are work in progress. I haven't fully installed them, but I really like this one because I call them the complainers. And it's just amazing to see how, well, depending on what we choose to look at, but we can start to see gestures coming up in the material as well, and seeing how it can be personified, which allows us to make even more parallels to ourselves. If we go to one more slide. Yeah, and this is not so much character driven, I would say, but this is when my experimentation started more from a technical perspective. So I made this open-ended cylinder, which is a little bit challenging to make in glass. And I was also working on opening closed forms. So this was one of the first pieces I made, and it's just an open arch. Again, that was only broken by heat. So actually the bottom part of the arch was hot and moving. So when the glass cracked, it allowed it to naturally open. So let's go to the next slide. In my, I guess, inquiry and work with compressed air or air, I just see glass as a vehicle to document a reaction, being that reaction, the gesture of pulling or the gesture of breaking with air. In this case, I was working on randomly inflating a patty of glass. So traditionally glass blowing is made on a blowpipe, but in this case, I was basically dropping little pancakes or cookies on the metal table and then poking a hole through them and blowing them up with compressed air. And there's so many parallels that I've had made that they look like dumplings, they look like beans, they're like these little things that hold so much life to them. And when you blow through them, it's almost like you're capturing the breath. But the fascinating thing to me about these is that when they get dropped on the metal table, they immediately contract. The glass immediately contracts. It reacts by contracting because the table is cold. So if we go to the next slide, it really captures incredible texture. And I call this series formations because I see these pieces as how formations would occur in nature. How like a drop of water gets frozen or a stone forms over time. These get formed pretty quickly though, but they are capturing the environment and the change in the environment in the same way as other things would happen in nature. So if we go to the next slide as well, I started working on installing them, and I've made some large clusters, but I also think of things like affordability and efficiency in working with the material. And I'm able to make these out of recycled glass in a very short window of time, which is usually blown pieces take between 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm able to make these pretty quickly, which makes them affordable, not just for myself, but for whoever would like to have them. And I started incorporating plant life in them to also, and water to also highlight the nature aspect of them, and the caustics that they create in the environment when glass travels through them really highlight the print of the temperature difference and when the piece was created. If we go to the next slide, a couple of years ago in 2019, I made some centerpieces for the Urban Glass Gala, and these were clusters of formations. So I started actually building natural formations, or my interpretation of a natural formation. And this is, I titled this piece a wall, a panel, or a cloud. And it had multiple interpretations depending on how we wanted to look at it. But it's really this like structure. It's about, I would say, like 18 inches in length, maybe like 13 or 15 in height. So it really creates a division in space and distorts the images as you see through. I think there's one more. Or no, actually, we move to the next piece. So because also in this inquiry of the possibilities of the material and utilizing its natural qualities, because I am not trying, as much as I am manipulating it, I am not trying to arbitrarily impose my will on the work to make it straight or symmetrical. I am really trying to create an environment or almost like catalyze a reaction for the material to do what it naturally does. So I started working on this series called Flammable Statements, and I sometimes think of, there's some things that I hear people say that create a very strong reaction within myself, and I guess within other people. We live in a time where like polarity is very prevalent right now. So I started, I was inspired by experiences I had to create basically prints of burning prints on wood, where I meticulously write with the glass to create a burn or let it catch on fire. So it's almost as if as the statement's being made, the piece ignites. And if we go to the next slide, I believe there is one more there of the process. This video is right now being, I guess, featured at a film festival called the GMT Glass Meet the Future Film Festival. It's based in Northlands in Scotland, but it's done in partnership with the Museum of Arts and Design in New York and the Toyama Museum in Japan. So this film is going to be on their website up until April 4th, and along with other incredible amazing artists that are making great work in glass. So there's a chance there to see it. And if we go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm still working on this series. But as I kept working on it, I realized that when I was writing with the glass, the wood started to burn, the nails started to come off. This is actually the structure. So I'm kind of like holding the glass from the nails, and from the burning, I was able to, as I write on the piece multiple times, because I just don't write on it only once. I do it repeatedly to create a more profound burn with the material. The nails started to come off. So in a great way, I'm also now able to keep the glass, which is and not just discard it, which is something that I'm thinking about for the future. Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit overview there. Didn't want to cover too much, but I hope it.
What an absolutely profound body of work, Romina. We are going to save questions for the end for all three of our artists presenting tonight, but I know I have so many questions for you about this incredible series, the Flammable Statement series, but all of your work has been absolutely beautiful. So I look forward to discussing it in just a little bit. And then next up, we have Gabrielle Dinger from Southern Louisiana, who is going to present about her work. Oh, and Gabby, do you want to unmute? And I'm just going to spotlight you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosemary, for having me as a part of this exhibition and this panel. And I have so many questions for you, Romina. That was outstanding. As she said, I am Gabrielle Dinger from South Louisiana, and memory has always been sort of an interesting concept for me to think about. It was early in my undergrad career when I was trying to figure out exactly what my work was about and what I was doing and what I was trying to make. And, was it a matter of like aesthetics, or what was the concept? And I kept going back to memory. And around that time, I also started to explore nature more. And I sort of made this deal with myself where as I would go on these hikes and explore, that if I could come back and just know the name of one plant, or remember something about that place, that the next time I visit that place, whether it's in a different season or a year from then, see if I can identify and add to this catalog that I started to create. And I also started to see that there was a lot of interest in material that I was using. So I became more interested in textiles. And at that time, I was a little bit weary of metalwork. I had just gotten into cast iron and, kind of working with wood, but I was hesitant to work with it. So all the work that I have for the panel today is all recent from my MFA thesis from May. So this piece is titled "We Will Do Like the Roots Do," and it's perhaps one of my most favorite works out of that body of work. And it is these metal forms that I cold forged and then painted, and then I would go in with a wire wheel and take away the paint and then paint again, and just kind of go through this like very cathartic process of removing paint and adding paint. And then I would treat the materials where they would rust, seeing that natural, or not natural material, but the original material come through. And at the time when I originally made that piece, I would wear it in my studio. I had just like these dangling little metal forms attached to wire. And I didn't know where it was going. This was at the start of the pandemic. I wasn't really allowed in the studio. Or I think I was still in the studio, but we were having limited access. But I would just kind of wear it around and think about like what it could be. And there was this really wonderful thing that was happening where as I would move, it was like a wind chime, but a very like chaotic one. And it got me thinking about just like how it would react within the natural world. And like, it's making this noise, it's saying I'm here, I'm present. And this piece actually came towards the end, when I was finalizing all the work, I had this chunk of wood that I had filled in with resin, and you can go to the next slide. And so that's just a detail of the rust coming through on that surface. But if you look closely at the wood, there's, I'm sorry, you can go to the next one. You can see that there's resin. And so I started thinking about this book that I was listening to, and I'd heard a couple different topics, and I've heard there's some really wonderful movies out there that I think I need to look into. But, you know, it was talking about the connection that trees have and how they communicate with one another. And, you know, thinking about how you can have this tree that doesn't have any foliage, but it's still thriving. And that was one of the things that was mentioned within the book, that they discovered that the mycelium, which is the root connection of mushrooms and fungi, was helping transfer information. And I thought that was really beautiful, that here was this damaged tree, and, you know, it still had this understanding of what it needed to do because of the connection from the other trees. And so this piece began to represent, like, you know, here it is, this cut off form, but from this little segment where the resin is that I'm highlighting comes this new growth. And within that new growth, on that metal surface, there is the rust, showing that it goes back to the history of what that tree was and what that object was. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit more within this piece is also shadow. So I consider shadow a material. And for me, it's about the impermanence that material has on a surface. You know, thinking about the 24 hours that you have in a day and how a shadow changes throughout the day. So you can go to the next slide. So this piece is titled A Map to Forgiveness. And actually, maybe it might be my screen. Would you mind scrolling down just like a tiny bit? So there's that little line at the bottom. And this piece actually underwent transformation, which had to do partly with transporting it. But originally it was one large vinyl sheet of material. It's actually originally a projector screen. And there was this conversation of, can you rust print on, you know, a vinyl material? And so I'd bought so much vinegar and had so many buckets, and I was just dumping this vinegar on the vinyl, and I would take sheets of steel and move it around the surface. And so you can see some movement within the piece. But part of the thing that I think about with this piece that connects it to memory and material is part of it was the physical act of moving. So as I would move the metal, I would also stand on certain parts and walk across it. And, you know, it became like this game in some way where I was jumping from metal pieces to metal pieces or trying to arrange it to create a certain composition. And sometimes it would work, and sometimes, you know, I would end up with something greater, or, you know, it would give me another idea. But for me, a lot of it was this process of moving throughout it and thinking about the things that were important to me as I was navigating that piece and creating it, and then seeing the rust stains that were a result of that. And so the reason why I wanted you to scroll down a little bit is there's that little bit of that line that runs along the bottom, which is on the floor. And so when I had first installed this piece, there was just this insane amount of rust that had fallen from it that I thought was really cool. And I have this tendency to hold on to materials that I think are really cool. So of course I kept a cup full of rust, and I ended up I would take iron bits and put it on the piece as well. So I sprinkled that along the floor, as well as sawdust, just to give it a little more body. But for me, that was like these little bits, these fragments that would fall off the piece that were still a part of the piece and came from that piece, but didn't quite stick. And so I thought it was really important to have the viewer, when they're coming to engage the piece and look at it, there's this line that stops them. And so then they have to investigate that surface on not only on the vinyl, but also on the floor. So you can scroll down. that's also maybe one of my favorite pieces. But so this piece is titled The Space Between. And it's one of my more newer works, and it's just steel and wood and resin as well. And I was very fortunate. I was given, you know, various chunks of wood. People realized that I was collecting a lot of that, and so I was given quite a bit. And this piece in particular was really beautiful. I believe it was a cut from maybe a wood turning process. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. But it was broken, and you can maybe see it a little bit. There's a line that runs down. And so I ended up filling it with resin again, thinking about this, the idea of bonding these two materials back together and trying to create that original form. You know, it's trying to hold on to what was there. And this piece also engages with rust as a material. And so with the piece, it was about just like thinking how you can have a connection with these materials and how they come together. And you can scroll down. I think maybe the next slide might have a, yeah. So on the top, I rusted it, or I treated it how I did with the, we will do like the root stew piece where, you know, I would add metal and then I would take it, or not metal, I'm sorry, paint, and take it away, and I add and take away, and then rust it. And I also began to take away the rust as well, and then start to add more rust, and thinking about how that material wanted to rust in certain spots. Which has always been sort of a fun challenge, because a lot of times I think, well, it's metal, it's going to rust, but a lot of times it's like, no, I'm only going to rust right here, you know, and it's a matter of how I've treated it. And you can also see the resin line a little bit more there. So you can go on to the next slide. So this piece is titled New Growth, Old Scars, and it's one that also engages the shadow quite a bit. And so similar to the concept of we will do like the roots do, you have this form growing out of one central point, and you know, it's something that is new from something that is deemed old. And this one was really fun to light for me, thinking about the shadow and thinking about that as a material, how I can take up space. And so you know, I was playing around with what direction the light was coming from and how that created this larger form. And if you go on to the next slide, you can see some of that surface detail. And so a lot of it was, I have a really hard time utilizing color within my work. I like, you know, very monochromatic, or not monochromatic, but I like a lot of nature tones and earth tones. And so this piece in particular, I decided I was gonna, I think, paint it like pink. I was like, I'm going for it, I'm gonna do it. Pink's the color you find in nature. And I hated it because I'm not comfortable with adding, you know, those little pops of color in there. And so I kept adding colors, and each time I'd add another color, I'd be like, no, this isn't working. I think at one point I'd painted it like a gray, and I hated that as well. And I went in one day and I started removing the paint instead of adding more. And I ended up with these really cool markations on the piece where it was these little divots, these little dents. And so I ended up painting it white, and I just really enjoyed that aesthetic that it, you know, it came through. It still showed that there was this memory of what the paint was still there, you know, showed that I tried to remove it, but it still came through, which I thought, you know, worked with this idea of overcoming traumas within your life, or events, or just growth in general, thinking about how all these things that make up who we are so important. And you know, you may not see them from far away, but they're still there in their own way. And so that was a really wonderful piece to see come to light. Is the next one the same piece? Yeah, so that's just a different angle. So it was one too where you know, thinking about the shape of the metal in relation to the wood, and how it just takes up so much space. So we can go on to the next one. So this piece, and I wish I would have had a video. I didn't think about that. This was actually a large installation that I did. So a lot of times when I was in the studio, when I wouldn't know what to do, I would make natural dyes. So if I wasn't rust staining something, I was, playing around with like the berries that I didn't eat all the way, and so they went bad. So I would like make a dye out of them, or I was using beans to make a stain. So that was sort of like when I didn't know what to do, I was going dye fabric and paper, and I ended up with this collection. And at that same time, I was, helping within the gallery space in grad school. And so one of the biggest complaints that I always heard about that space was the radiators within the space. So anytime you'd have to hang work, you have to think about these registers that are right below that, they're painted white, but they're sort of distracting in some sense, so you have to think about how you're going to arrange the room with them. And I decided that rather than complaining about it, I was just going to cover them up, which was really fun to do and think about. And so for this piece, I ended up taking all those materials and then making more and trying to create a coating, sort of like kudzu, thinking about like just covering the surface. And so I covered the radiators or the registers. And so when the registers were on, they would ruffle and they would move. And so I thought that was, thinking about this material and how it naturally wants to move. And it's gonna, because it's paper and some of it's fabric, it's going to have these different sound effects. And also, it didn't quite stay, it would shift and it would move. And I think a lot of people really wanted to touch it, which, it was fun to touch. So, but just thinking about the use of these natural stains and how they come to light, how they have life whenever they're just slightly moving. And I wanted to, wasn't necessarily the material itself that had this memory, but it was thinking about like the stains that I was using and the dyes that I was using and what they left a mark of, what their residual mark that they were conveying. So I think the next slide might just be a different view of that piece. And so it basically covered this whole wall in the room and then wrapped around into another register. So that was really it was a challenging piece. I had a few very wonderful individuals who spent time with me and helped me install it. Because I didn't think it was ever going to end. But it came to life, and it was just wonderful to see that, with everything that I was thinking about within that body of work and how we change throughout experiences and how those experiences affect us. So I think that concludes my portion. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Gabby. That was absolutely a stunning thesis exhibition. I would love to see it or to have seen it in person, but this piece in particular is absolutely incredible. What, I know we're saving questions to the end, but I just have one question. What are these leaves? To me, it looks like they're leaves made out of.
I'm sorry, I should have included more pictures of that. So those pieces are actually during the transition of not having access to the studio. I was taking, so that metal form, the first piece that I started with, the piece that's in the exhibition, I would take those sheets and I would trace them onto paper because I was like, I can work with paper at home. And so I was rust printing on the paper at home and having these, the residual mark of those forms that I then forged into another piece. And so I laced wire through them and created like these little branches that I then installed throughout the space. So those also moved and fluttered like leaves. So those are really fun to work with.
Absolutely stunning. I love the discussion between like the permanence of metal and the impermanence of paper and fabric that you're using in the gallery space. We'll ask you more questions, but I'm going to give the presentation over to Becca now. Let me just spotlight you, Becca. And then we'll move on to your piece in the exhibition.
Great. So this is the work that I have in the exhibition. It is titled, oh God, I'm blanking on the order, sorry. Basically the title of it is like each of my hands in the different positions that I use to create each of the works. So things like fold, twist, squeeze, hold, depress and things like that. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I just like, what is memory? Like the dictionary definition of memory is the faculty by which the mind stores information and remembers information. And it's basically something that's remembered from the past. When I first went to Alfred and took a casting class, I was really kind of struck by the like wax that we use in the lost wax process. So you basically create a form in the wax, and there's a like trick where you can pour the like molten wax onto a metal table and sort of scrape it up and like mush it around so it's like a silly putty consistency, and then you can manipulate it the same way that you would clay. And you kind of have to work fast because it cools down very quick. But I was very taken by that process. And I've always been a tactile person, and I was the type of child who would like play in the dirt with worms and be like, oh, look at this worm. So just like always loved like touching different things. So when I came across this process in the Foundry class, I really sort of, that was my first delve into material manipulation. And I thought that it was very interesting how you could create a form, but then you could also like reheat certain parts of it. And like for this piece in particular, I like would press my fingers into the parts that I would reheat. And then just the nature of casting, the final object, when you cast it into metal, is exactly the shape, if it casts right, of the wax. So it's sort of this holding of all of the things that you did to the wax. If you if you could go to the next slide, please. And also while I was there, this is sort of the more molding part, I guess, whereas the other one was me just pressing my fingertips into the surface of something that I had already created. This was me literally taking the wax and like pressing it between my hands like this, or like pressing it over my hand to create these forms that were kind of reminiscent of shells in a way. But these were also the negative spaces between my hands in different positions. But what happened was they didn't cast right. So the mold broke, and like these images right now are just painted wax. I just painted them with graphite. But then when I eventually cast them into metal, they didn't cast, and they were kind of like sharp and ugly and didn't look anything like the forms. If you could go to the next slide, please. So these are just some close-ups of the work that I have in the exhibition. This is twist and tear. So the left one is where I would create this like moldable wax, and I just sort of twisted it. And the one on the right is obviously tearing. So while I was in grad school, I created this work, and I went to SUNY Albany, and we didn't cast as often as Alfred. And so I was kind of like stuck. And when I first got there, I didn't really know what to do because I was a casting person. I would cast every week while I was at Alfred, and I was sort of stuck. And I had saved the miscast pieces from the previous slide that were sharp and ugly. And I had saved them from my time at Alfred, and I had them sitting on my shelf in my graduate studio. And I was like, I love material manipulation. I love playing with the wax when it's in that malleable state. And I was like, I'm just going to recreate these two pieces that miscast. But I'm going to push myself, and I decided to make 10 versions, trying to do different hand positions each time, just as a way to get past my art block. But it was really interesting the way that the material sort of, as it cools, leaves evidence of, I'm trying to use my cursor here, leaves evidence of where the wax was cooling. So kind of like Romina was saying, where the temperature of the material sort of causes it to react a certain way. The same thing with the wax. So where it was in my hands, it stayed nice and malleable, but as it was exposed to the air in those like chunky areas, it it created these really interesting like rips, or it almost reminded me of bark. So then when the works were cast in metal, it had that same sort of encapsulated every detail of my experience working with the wax into the final form. If you could go to the next slide, please. And then for my first like graduate review, I tested out like the projection. I was trying to combine multiple medias, and I thought it might be interesting to show the work with overlays of my hand. So after the objects were cast, I took photos like holding them the same position that I used to manipulate the wax. And I threw a projection of that over it, so you could see like how each individual casting was manipulated while it was in its wax form. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is another work that I did while I was in grad school. It's called The Wall, loosely based off of The Wall by Jean-Paul Sartre, who's a French existentialist. He's dead now. So it was really in this work, which is plaster over a steel frame, that I took manipulating the material and trying to leave evidence of the hand and evidence of like the history of its creation in the work itself. So if we think about human memory being defined as how our minds store information, then material memory is evidence of the history of the artwork's creation. So those are like my hand motions in the work there. Next slide, please. And then when I was in grad school, like my final semester, I had mono really bad, so I couldn't really organize pores or do all of the like laborious work of casting metal. So I was thinking, well, what else can I cast in? And previously, my summer job where I work at an art camp, we had helped the theater department make like fake bottles using sugar glass, so they could like whack people over the head with the bottle and it would shatter. So I did a test of the sugar where you basically boil it until it's between 300 and 310 degrees Fahrenheit, and like do like a rotational casting in the mold, and then you take it out and it looks really like glass. And I did a test at home and I took it out and it was beautiful. It was a perfect casting of this like bottle mold that I had made. And then I went out with my friends and I came back and the entire bottle like sagged, almost like the one in the middle photo there. And so that I thought that was really beautiful, that the sugar was sort of reverting back to its original state. It really wanted to be flat. It wanted to absorb all the moisture in the air and then like just become a pool of sugar water again. Go to the next slide, please. And this is just a slide of, I tried to cast these like long stem roses. And I don't know if anyone knows about how brittle iron is, but when it's really thin and like small, it's pretty brittle. So it's so strong that it sort of is too rigid to flex like steel does. And so it snaps when it's thin, which is funny to think about because it's such a, like you think of iron when you think of a strong metal, but really the type of iron that we cast with is not. So this, you can see, I don't know, Rose, if you can point to some of the cracks. So you could see some of the areas where like even that flat part is maybe this thin. It's just, super thin. So that's just to give you some context for the next slide. So I had this work in mind where I would cast 12 roses that were like put in this basket, almost thinking about like, oh, when people at like a Renaissance fair or something say, oh, pretty rose for like a delicate lady or something. So I just had this idea to have these like really metal roses that were super fragile and existed in this basket, and to people maybe looked like they were very like rigid and very strong, but like had an underlying meaning of like fragility because of the way that the material iron like breaks when it's really thin. But I never got one to cast perfectly because they all broke as they were cooling, which you can see is the different pieces on the side here. But then it actually worked out better because now when someone looks at the artwork, they don't necessarily need to know that little tidbit about iron being fragile when it's thin, and it just like reads better that way. But I think that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Becca. And the last slide I have here before I end our slideshow is just a slide saying about how we're hosting another one of these material memory panels on this coming Thursday, April 1st, and then we'll have a third session on Tuesday, April 13th, and all of the panels are 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to stop the share, so you should be able to see all of us large now, so everyone's on screen. I know I have a lot of questions, but at this time, if you're watching live, you can also put any questions in the chat. I see one comment in the chat. I'm just going to read first. Blown away by how wonderful all the works are. Everything seems considered and thoughtfully made. I cannot agree more about that. An incredible panel of artists here who have really made eloquent and conceptually very strong work. And then the next question I see, this is from Amber White, who will be speaking on our panel Tuesday, the 13th of April. But she said, this is a question for everyone. Is there a certain temperature or time of the year that sparks the most memories for you? Also, what material do you currently most relate with? So I guess we'll answer her first question first. Is there a certain time of the year or temperature that brings back memories?
For me, it's fall, like when that temperature starts to change and it's a little bit crisp. That's also my favorite time to go on walks. So for me, it's a lot of walking through spaces and the smells and the things that are, all around me, and just bring back memories. And so for me, I would say fall.
I would say summer, mostly because the summer job that I run the sculpture shop at this art specific like summer program for children and teens, and it's just like a huge artist community, so I always have incredible memories that I make there, so it just makes me warm inside.
I think I am with you on that, Becca. For me, it's the beginning of summer because I grew up in South America, so the end of the school year was at the beginning of summer, and I lived really close to the beach, so it meant that I was going to go to the beach for the next month. And there's just something about the air changing when it starts to warm up, the smell, that brings these memories of the possibilities of being closer to nature outside of, being in the city or the schedule of life.
Beautiful. And then for her second question, is there a material that you're currently relating with, maybe other than your, if you're a glass artist, glass, or if you're a metal artist, metal?
I've been doing a lot of watercolor painting. So that was something that I sort of picked up during the quarantine. I had taken like a watercolor class, and then during the quarantine, I was like, well, I have the materials, might as well practice. But I got really into it, and like metal, where it's sort of unpredictable, and like forced me to not have so much control over the result. So I like it.
I would say for me, and it's partly because as a junior high teacher, it's one of the processes that I introduced to my kids, but paper mache, which I've used in a lot of my older work. But it's been really cool to make like these small maquettes that I'm using with, wire, but I'm not able to weld right now. So take these maquettes and then cover with paper and arrange those forms. So
For me, it's been sulfur, the natural element in the periodic table. I started working with it about a year and a half ago now, and it has a really bad reputation as being toxic, related to acid rain. Even in the Bible, it's referenced as the hell is made out of brimstone and fire. In Eastern culture, it also has not so great connotation, but it has really great healing qualities. That's why it's used in, always forget the name in English, but places where you go that are like an outdoor sauna that have sulfur. But hot springs, yes, thank you, hot springs. So, and it's because the material has an extra electron that actually absorbs the negative ions from your body in the same way as salt or seawater, or in a way crystal. So I've started, and it has a really low melting point. So I can melt it with like a hot plate belt basically, and I've been making molds and casting these interactive sculptures, like a meditation seat and like a massage tool, an acupressure tile, and I'm working on making an installation of kind of like yoga props made out of this material. So I could talk a lot about it. I'm super excited about it. But yes, sulfur is my new exciting material.
That's incredible, Romina. Is there images of any of your sulfur artwork on your website?
Yeah, there is a tab on my website called sibilants. Sibilants are the letters that like don't have a vowel in the alphabet in a way, or make like a hissing sound when pronounced. So when the sulfur actually like touches your body, it sometimes creates a crackling sound. So that's why I titled that body of work Sibilants, because you can hear it cracking almost like a whisper. And I also did a performance that's on my website under the same category.
Wow. That all sounds incredible. Coral Lambert, who will be speaking on Thursday's panel, just wrote in to you, Romina, and said you might like to check out the work of Welsh land artist Chris Drury, working on site with sulfur caves and mines.
Ooh, I'm writing that down. Great.
And all of these questions should remain, I believe, in the comments. And we have others just saying, thank you for sharing. Have a great night. All of the work was gorgeous. Thank you for your time. And thank you so much for being here with us. So I'm now going to ask a couple of individual questions I have just from watching your work. But the first I'm just going to ask Gabby, when you said that you consider shadow a material, that really sparked my interest. I was curious for you if you've exhibited that series of work in your MFA thesis in areas of natural light where the sunlight might affect during the day the shadows cast on each individual work.
So when the pandemic had first started, I should say, I had taken everything home, and we had this spare room that I turned into like my studio / installation space. And there was this giant window in there, and the first piece that I thought to install in there was the piece that was on the registers, the paper piece, because I had all this paper. And at that point, I was like, I can't install this on registers. Like, what do I do with it? And then I was like, wait, there's the windows, there is, the space. And so I started installing that stuff or installing the paper. And those, they do cast a shadow, but not as much. But it was really cool to work with because I would cover part of the window and then I would install some of the other work within the space. And so the colors that would shine through from the paper when the natural light was coming through, whether it was like the bean dyed paper, had this more purpley hue. And, it was just cool to see these shadows of different colors affect how it looked on the piece throughout the day. And I did some documenting. I want to reinstall that piece because I would like to have more documentation of that work in different arrangements, and especially with how it affects other works, or and how it affects the shadow. So I will say there's this really great book. It's called Becoming Animal, which is, I was thinking about shadow before that, but in that book they talk about shadow as this material within the natural space, and how you can tell the time of day. based on the shadow. So I would highly recommend that book.
I just wrote it down. Thank you. Before I move on to, do either of my other panelists have a question for Gabby? And we'll do the same for all three of you.
No, I just wanted to say it's incredible work. I've seen some pictures online of your thesis, but I've never seen that installation before. So very, very incredible.
Yeah, I do have to say too, I just want to keep talking more after this is over about your work and also Becca's. But two things that really stood out to me was the attention to natural transformation and also the physical act of moving. And those two things in the context of memory are things that really stood out. Like the physical act of moving, there are so many subconscious, our body has memory as well. Like we don't think of a lot of movements that we do on a daily basis because they just come natural to us. So there's this whole other side of memory that is not rational, that is just about how we stay alive, how we interact with the space around us. And just like seeing you talk about how you were resting those pieces, the large panels, and also using your movement, really, I thought was very profound.
Thank you.
So Romina, I'm going to ask you a question next. I'm curious how many canes you've pulled at different studios for the body of work where you were mopping the studio floors with molten glass and then pulling canes. Is that a series that you've created multiple times at different studios?
Yes, and it's an ongoing series. It's not nearly completed at all. I think the first time I did it was at Pilchuck in 2013. And then I have some from Urban Glass, a studio in Chicago, I believe a studio in South Jersey. And I wanted to get one from a friend in Kansas City who had just started a studio, but he had just coated the floor and I felt too bad to do it. I felt terrible to even ask, but I was there visiting and helping him for a month some years ago. And I really wanted to have dust from his floor because it was also so clean that I think that as I keep making this work, I'll kind of have an archive too, and you would be able to tell the difference of the types of dust that are documented in these places. But I also realized that just mopping glass studio floors isn't necessarily, it's not very practical because then I would only be documenting that, which is great. But I've also started collecting, or I'm open to collecting dust from living spaces to have a more archival thing. Just, yeah, from the remnants of cleaning or like the bag of vacuum cleaner. Yeah.
It's an incredible collection, and I love them just as canes, like as objects, as themselves, and then the work that you also blew with the pulled canes after mopping the floor with the glass are absolutely exquisite.
I had a question for you, actually. Like your glass work, the not the stretched ones, but the smaller things, how do you photograph that? Because it's just so luminous. Like they're just absolutely gorgeous.
The cracked ones or the little ones?
The cane and the like dishware sets.
So there are a couple of ways in which I do it. If I usually have like a white backdrop, like a full-on seamless paper hanging, and if for clear glass, I don't shine the light on the glass. I shine the light on the paper behind the glass. So if this is the paper and the glass is here, like the light would be going on the paper and the glass would be outside of the light. So then the glass is being lit from the reflection of the light on the paper, because once you put light on the glass, it just washes it away.
Yeah. Or you get a spotlight or something.
Exactly, a reflection. And I also put a lot of distance between the glass and the back, because in that way you get rid of the horizon line. So it looks like just one.
Yeah, they're incredible photos. It's just great.
Thank you.
I have a question too. Yeah, that was an amazing, just all of it was amazing. And I didn't think about it earlier, but watching your video the other day of the words and watching how the glass, how it stretched and thinking about material as a memory, and the mark that it's making on the wood. But my question is, how often do you work with the recycled materials?
Oh, it varies. It really depends on the studio I'm working at. So, for example, all that work that I made at the residency at Wheaton, I was mainly using recycled glass. There were very few times where I used purely new glass, or so it will always mix a little bit with recycled glass. When I blow glass at Urban Glass, which is in Brooklyn, which is where I usually do it, I depending on the type of work I'm making, I'll use new glass, but they have a tank that recycles glass. So every time I'm able to use that glass, like it doesn't matter if it has bubbles or little imperfections, I'll go for the recycled. Yeah, but yeah, I'd like to use it more.
Really awesome, really beautiful work.
Thank you. It's mutual with your work.
Thank you.
So the one other body of your work I would love to comment on is the pods you're making by dropping like the cookie and then pressing air into those. Those are absolutely incredible, and I love that you are using air as a glass blower in a way I've never seen before, especially too when you are fracturing certain cups or elements using just that compressed air. I think that is you. Well, I'm so impressed by you, but you are just manipulating this material in ways that I haven't seen anyone else imagine. So I really commend you, Romina.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that the motivation behind doing that is that really with my work in glass and in other materials, I'm really trying to give an audience a different perspective of seeing, so presenting things in an alternative way. And I hope that then having those like little moments of awakening of like, oh, glass is not just like this blown in a machine or perfectly straight. It's actually a malleable material that behaves in this way, or you can do this to that. I'm hoping that having those like little moments of awakening can translate into life in general, like in a relationship with like nature and ourselves and the world. So I kind of like my process is based around trying to find those alternatives in a way. And yeah, the piece is a byproduct, but that's the intention.
Absolutely stunning. I love the concepts you're working with as well. And then if anyone else has any questions for Romina, or I will move on to Becca as well. So Becca, the question I have for you, coming out of your series that is in the Collective Memory exhibition, the Pull and Twist and Compress series, if there was a shape for your hands that you felt through this pandemic, what would that look like?
Oh, wow, that's a hard one. I feel like it would either be this or this pressed around my phone, just constantly updating on information and checking my email, and just, I don't know, it would be a stressful hand gesture for sure.
Yeah, I love in those pieces, I think there's such an emotional memory that's being captured within that bronze or iron, whatever metal you're using, or just the wax. That's really beautiful. Like they tell a story without having the background of how they were created or conceptualized, which I think is really incredible.
Yeah, a lot of people think, like, I think that they kind of look like bones, but some people have said that they look kind of like shells or like crustaceans, or even like bark, for the ripped parts, I guess. But yeah,
I thought they looked like bones too initially when I saw them, before knowing they were the print of the interior of the hands. And I love to in that with that visual relationship, how you're really documenting the invisible, like you're really documenting the negative space, and like the implications of that, and even how that translates to the flowers, the roses. I thought, like, I have no idea how you can make that. It's just like mind blowing on a technical level. It's very cool. But how you're touching upon the subject of like invisibility, materiality, that with such a simple gesture.
Definitely.
Simple. Not simple at all. We know the process now, but yes, it's seemingly simple.
If it looks simple, we're doing it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and well, I was gonna say, I don't think it like registered right away when I first saw that piece. And it's a captivating piece, but it was also really wonderful to see that piece. And I don't think I've ever seen an image of it where you had projected the hands over. I just thought that was a really like beautiful, like it, you could get that information, but then you were giving just a little bit more without having the image within the object or the object within the image. And just that overlay. And I love it. So.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So it's at about 8:42 for us who are in live time. We have some people watching with us still. If you have any last questions for Gabby, Romina, and Becca, please put them in the chat now. I know you are all such busy and incredibly talented artists, and I know you all have opportunities coming up in the next few weeks. Gabby, I know you're on the Artist Chatting with T. Do you want to plug that?
Oh, next Wednesday, I'll be sitting down with Lauren Koch talking about art and cats and music and probably just everything. So that'll be live through, I want to say she's doing it through YouTube as well. And so that'll be next Wednesday, April 7th. I want to say 5 o'clock, 6. It's on the internet. So, but yeah, that'll be coming up. So.
Wonderful. And I'll share that on Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project's social media as well on our stories. And then Romina has so many incredible opportunities, but do you want to share just a couple of them, Romina?
Yeah, the most recent is coming tomorrow. I'll be part of a panel discussion with another 3 amazing artists that have films featured at the Glass Meet the Future Film Festival. And it's gonna be live through the Museum of Arts and Design, and it's gonna be a conversation with the I think curator of collections. She's called Samantha Dutilio. So we're gonna be talking about her processes, about the work in the film, and also just the title of the panel is Glass in Flux. So I guess just how glass changes and changes us, so it changes as well.
Wonderful. And how much longer can people see your flammable statement work on in the film exhibition?
It's until April 4th. It's on the Northlands Creative Centre website in Scotland. But then it's just going to be on my website after that. So indefinitely.
Wonderful. So people will not miss their opportunity to see it. And we have posted about Romina, and we have linked to her Vimeo page.
Yeah, Vimeo, yes.
Vimeo page. So you can see she has an incredible collection of video pieces, and we'll have to get to it another time. I'm so interested. She does a series of pieces where she eats her teeth as well. So I'm just going to leave that as a teaser. Everyone go watch it. It's incredible. And then Becca, I know you're doing a watercolor workshop, or you're teaching a virtual workshop. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm teaching a virtual watercolor workshop through this art store near me that also offers like workshops, and that'll be happening on, I believe, April 17th. I have it advertised also on my Facebook page. So if you go to my Rebecca A. Fliss Facebook page, you can, if you want to learn how to paint some watercolor, we'll be painting beets and bell peppers. So sign up.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to all three of you incredible artists for being here tonight and also for featuring your work in the Collective Memory exhibition and helping raise awareness about Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. I really appreciate it. And I encourage anyone who's watching to definitely check out their individual websites as well as their individual social media presence. They're three absolutely incredible artists, and you should continue following them in their incredible artistic journeys. Thank you all so much. We'll sign off now, and I will follow up with everyone individually.